Good morning, everybody. As you come on, if you can put yourself on mute, we'll be starting in about 3-4 minutes. I'm waiting for a few more people, then we'll begin. This is the moment for awkward pauses. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this roundtable on rural, remote, and northern e-learning. I'm hoping this morning that we'll have a chance to get some feedback from some of the struggles that we're facing in these rural, remote, northern areas, and also look at what are some solutions that exist or that we can recommend that will be helpful in helping our kids connect with the education that other peers are trying to have across the province. So just a few things this morning. So this roundtable is being recorded. It's going to be made available on my website, matthewdever.ca, tomorrow. We're going to begin with some introductions of some of the people that are involved in providing services to the north, rural, and remote areas. We'll then have a chance. I'm going to ask some questions, some moderated questions, and then the audience is going to have a chance in about 20-25 minutes to participate in the roundtable. And if you want to participate, there's a feature in Zoom to raise hand that's in the participants window. Simply just raise your hand and I will get to you at that point. If you want to ask a question but you don't want to be part of the recording, you can put your question in the chat window and I'll read it out. And only those who ask questions directly will be in the end video that'll be posted publicly. And please ensure that your mic is on mute at all times until I invite you to participate. So the roundtable is going to last 1 hour, and there's going to be a follow-up email that I'll be putting out tomorrow with a summary of what we've talked about today, as well as any recommendations that we may be making. All right. So I think all of the people that are participating from the organizations are on now. I just saw that Carol Ann just joined us. So I'm going to start with some introductions. First of all, I'm going to introduce James Monder, who's from Xplornet. Go ahead, James.
Well, thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me, I have some feedback on my headphones here. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Well, thanks again, Matt, for having me, and good morning to everyone. Good morning to those I can see via video and those who have called into this roundtable as well. I'm Vice President of Xplornet Communications. I oversee communications and government and community outreach for Xplornet. We're an internet service provider that services exclusively rural areas. So to be completely blunt, you know, if you live in Montreal, Toronto, downtown Ottawa, Vancouver, et cetera, you know, you're probably not a customer of ours. We focus exclusively on rural areas of Canada, which typically is where, you know, larger telecommunications providers like Bell, Rogers, or TELUS consider it uneconomic to deploy or install fiber optic cable in the ground or aerially among towers. We have customers in every province and territory of Canada, about 400,000 homes in total we serve, which if you take the Statistics Canada definition of the number of people per household, it works out to about 1 million rural Canadians have access to our internet services, and again, exclusively in rural, exclusively remote areas of Canada. We do so through two primary technology platforms. The first is fixed wireless technology, which is a tower that I'm sure all of you have seen many, many times as you drive along a highway in rural Canada. You know, we own and operate about 4,000 of those towers, again, located throughout rural Canada. The second technology platform is satellite. We operate 5 satellites that deliver the internet to the particularly rural, particularly remote parts of Canada. Sometimes if you live in a heavily forested or wooded area and the topography doesn't lend itself to us connecting you through one of our towers, we will also use our satellite to deliver the internet to you. So that's who we are, and you know, that is what we do in essence. We've been in business for 15 years. We started and were established as a small business, and in essence, it was a couple of entrepreneurs in Woodstock, New Brunswick, population 5,000, that didn't have access to the internet and wanted to get it and wanted to give it to their friends and family. And from there, obviously, we've grown. Canadian, well, I should say North American-owned, Canadian-operated. All of our contact centers are in Canada. All we do is rural. So I'm looking forward to the conversation here. Some of you may be Xplornet customers, current or former. If you're a former customer, I'll brace for impact. I will say that we do take compliments of Xplornet with respect to our service, but I'm happy to entertain any questions, and then looking forward to the conversation on some of the challenges that you know, folks who need to have access to e-distance and e-learning opportunities have in terms of getting connected. We know that about 95% of Canadians actually have access to an internet connection. The question is whether or not they choose to connect, or whether that connection serves their needs, whether they can stream video reliably, for example, whether that service is cost effective. And I suspect, Matt, that these are the sorts of issues that we'll discuss over the course of the next hour. So I'll stop there and cede the floor to others. And thanks again for having me.
All right, thank you, James. Next, I'll have Dennis Filiatro.
Great. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about services in our own backyard. So I'm the executive director of One Kids Place Children's Treatment Center that's situated in North Bay. We are a fairly young organization. We're one of 21 children's treatment centers in the province of Ontario, and one of 5 that's actually situated in Northern Ontario. Our primary focus is rehabilitation, outpatient rehabilitation services for children and youth from the ages of birth to school exit. We provide autism services for children and youth in 29% of the province of Ontario. So from a landmass territory, we cover from as far south as we will say as Gravenhurst, Ontario, and as far north as the James Coast, Musinimus Factory, Peokitano. One of our colleagues who is also a northern provider as well. We have 3 northern providers for autism services in our area. Our organization has been a provider for the last 8 years, and our model is really dependent on an integrated model for families that would include children's rehabilitation services, autism services, whether it's in the education setting, at home, in the community, or in the daycare. I'm really looking forward to being able to have some discussions around some of the questions that are going to be posed, and look forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have Kenny Robertson.
Yes, hello. Good morning, all. Welcome, of course. First, I wanted to start off at the top with the patients' participation that were positive, 37 out of 42. I wanted to acknowledge how they could spread rapidly amongst our community members, and that my prayers and hopes, I put tobacco down every day for people and families who are dealing with these ongoing issues. And I just feel really bad for those families who can't help their loved ones right now. But my name is Ken Robertson. I'm a father of 3 ASD. I have 4, 2 boys, 2 girls. And I call them the 4 No More. It's a very exclusive club. So I really appreciate everything that Matthew's put together here. I am actually from British Columbia. My territory is Shawartmik territory, which is where the Thompson Rivers meet to Kamloops, the meaning behind it. But I live here. My better half is from here in Toronto. So we make it work, even though my family's from there. My First Nations heritage, we do still practice smudging traditionally, also going to powwows, but of course these have changed now with virtual powwows. So these are changing times, of course, online. As James mentioned earlier, usage is up 67% overall across Canada, for instance. So TV is even making a comeback as well. 35% is up. So we see the kind of demographic changing, but I want to get to say thanks again, and we'll take it from there.
Finally, we have Carol-Ann McNeil. Go ahead, Carol-Ann.
So I am one of the directors at Lanark Community Programs, which is a center in the Lanark area. So we provide autism services as well for Lanark, Leeds, and Grenville area. And we provide a network of other services for the developmental population in our area as well, from respite services to speech language, OT services. We have our therapeutic writing program. So it's a mirage of services. So of course, we're doing an awful lot of transformation right now into the Zoom technology and telemedicine, and it's been, like for everyone else, a straight up curve. So we are very interested in very rural population, and our outlying areas from our small towns certainly struggle with this topic. So we're trying to figure out how to reach people quickly and most efficiently. And I have to say, on the upside of it, it's been a pretty exciting time as well for service coordination and thinking outside the box. And I have to give a lot of credit to the people that we are working with and families, as well as the service providers that I'm coming across in this kind of a network. There's lots of great ideas and lots of great things that will certainly last a long time.
Thank you, Caroline. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Matthew Dever. I'm an autistic father of 5 kids. 3 of them are also autistic, a tween, a teen, and an adult on all ends of the spectrum. I've been involved in advocacy work most of my life, autism focused for the last 17 years. I live in rural Eastern Ontario, and I have been for many years off and on a customer of Xplornet. I sat on the OAP advisory panel last summer, and I'm now on the implementation working group that's coming up with a new Ontario Autism program. I'm the Director of Outreach for Autism Advocacy Ontario. I'm the founder of Autistic Bridge Ontario. I'm a director with Hagel. All right, so now that we've got introductions open and out of the way, I'm going to ask a few questions to the people that are representing these organizations. We can get the discussion going this morning. So first of all, the question is, how do you currently serve your clients in rural remote areas in this time of non-in-person visits? I'll start with Dennis.
For our organization, one of the significant shifts that obviously occurred was the introduction of the new Ontario Autism program, and how that service has created some difficulties in terms of rural remote areas. And I'll speak specifically to Northern Ontario, that the one-size-fits-all type of system that was initially developed actually created a situation where we took a few steps back in terms of our service delivery model, not only as our agency, but the other organizations that were also delivering autism services. And a very simple example of that would be, for example, the waiting list, and how families are moving from the waiting list, going from a waiting list where our strategy in the past was really geography based. So if we have therapists that are going into one area, we would like to be able to serve as many families as possible in those rural remote areas. The introduction prevented some of that innovation to actually occur in rural remote areas, where it was based on chronology that families would be taken off of the waiting list, which really wasn't a cost-effective or an efficient way to deliver quality services in rural and remote areas. What we've really focused on over the last little while has been capacity building in the Northern Ontario communities. And that capacity building goes well beyond just those that provide autism services. It includes child and family services. It includes resources where agencies can actually come together to deliver services. I mentioned earlier, we have 5 children's treatment centers in Northern Ontario, and how do we best utilize the skills and expertise in the children's treatment centers and develop an autism service delivery model where we can have a holistic approach for children and youth, where occupational therapy, speech language pathology, augmentative and alternative communication can also be part of that service delivery model that's so needed. But the most important aspect, and I know Ken will probably reference this a little bit later, is really having what we call boots on the ground and being able to build that resource within the community. We see ourselves as an influencer of being able to build that resource in the communities by being there to be able to educate, being able to provide insight where that insight is actually utilized by members within the community. So I'll give an example of an educational assistant who works within the school environment, who could also help deliver a behavior services plan that would be would be involved in the school setting. Using a child and family services organization to be able to do foundational services on an ongoing basis and providing them with those opportunities. We've also looked at how do we build that capacity, and we've been utilizing some of the post-secondary institutions to be able to do so. We're currently in discussions with Canada College in North Bay about developing a program who is highly focused on Indigenous education in terms of being able to develop a program that the education and the experiential opportunity could be utilized through our organization or another organization delivering autism services in Northern Ontario, and having them go back to their home communities where with support and education that's utilized. Historically, our organization has used virtual technology to be able to do interventions to provide consultation. However, we have found that those pieces of technology, again, James will probably reference that, sometimes become a little bit unreliable, but also at the same time, the face-to-face and the physical contact between individuals and that face-to-face opportunity to meet with the family is so important in terms of being able to build trust. And when we talk about northern communities who come from small communities who feel that service providers are kind of in and out and not really providing a quality service, our organization has taken a step back from that in the sense that when we go to a community, we are there for several days, sometimes weeks, to really establish a relationship with those families so that when they do see us on video conference and we are reaching out to each other on an ongoing basis, that there's a trust that's established within that. So we have regional providers that we utilize. We have a psychological assistant, we have behavior analysts, we have BCBAs, behavior therapists, as well as a team of occupational therapists and speech language pathologists that do go into various communities across the north to be able to establish those relationships, establish the treatment interventions that we're looking for, and build capacity within those communities. So those are kind of the three key areas that our organization focuses on when we are in different communities in the north.
Caroline, how are you? How's your organization serving your clients right now in the rural and remote areas?
So can I just ask a question before we move on? Can you explain a little bit further about you're going into a community for several days and what that looks like?
So, and again, I think Kendall mentioned this because we've had conversations about this in the past. It's really about a team that goes in.
Okay.
And that team would consist of a behavior therapist, a psychological associate, potentially a behavior analyst, depending on what the needs are, an occupational therapist, and a speech language pathologist. And again, we go to various communities, we stay within kind of these districts, and that's how we plan our interventions. And it's really to assess needs. And it's not only assessing the needs of individuals and families, it's also about assessing the needs of the community as well. What does the community need while we're not there to be able to support kids in different environments, whether it's in the community, at daycare, or in the home? So our staff actually insert themselves into the communities, try to become as much as part of the community as possible by reaching out and working with education, working with child welfare if there's a need to, working with children's mental health agencies, and any other agencies such as the children's treatment centers to be able to promote an educational value and an intervention value that wraps around the family.
Great, thanks. So what we've been doing and what we do primarily is we've tried to, since COVID, we've moved much more into home offices for people, obviously. And via those home offices, we provide some technology, if not available to families, on a either loan basis or some basis, any basis, so you can figure it out. And we have been doing foundational and certainly consulting, offering families at the basic level behavior interventions, doing Zoom meetings on a very regular basis with clients and with their families, creating more of a mediator model in many cases as well. Offering, some of our speech pathologists are offering Hannon, and there's Sarah, so she can speak to that a little bit, to those families. Hi, Sarah. And certainly we've been offering a multidisciplinary approach, or working very hard on doing that, which in our world is a little bit different than we were doing before. We had access to all of that, but it was almost an individual referral. Families are loving it, that part. very, very much. One stop, one shop. They also actually, we're getting a lot of good feedback about the fact that they don't have to leave their homes, that their children are there. I mean, it's just such a new environment now and a new reality for people. And so everyone's adjusting, and it hasn't been that long really when you think about it. But like you, we spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out the process. So the other parts that we are doing as well as respite, which is what I do primarily. Respite's a bit of a change up too. We have a number of caseworkers that follow all of our respite families. So we've been providing a lot of support daily to those families. We have day services for adults as well. And so we've been Zooming in daily, having coffee hours with those individuals, planning different kinds of groups, just like a lot of people are doing. So there's a lot of card nights, there's a lot of different kind of activity nights that people can kind of partake in. And that has been going very well. And we've been doing the autism leads have helped to strategize around porch kits and different kinds of activities that can be dropped off, which we're doing a lot of dropping off of activities for families to do. And then we'll follow up with a call to maybe even go into the process of doing a bit of therapy around that. Setting goals and asking families what they want. Basically not overwhelming families. And I guess the other thing is there's just some fundamental realities. We do a lot of grocery drop-offs, pharmaceutical drop-offs, pickups and deliveries, just to try and keep families balanced a bit. Anything else, Sarah?
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. I missed the first part of the introductions. I see some names I recognize, though, so that's nice. So I'm the director at Lanark Community Programs, as Caroline probably mentioned. So the programs that we're overseeing are the autism services, speech and language services, infant and child development, early resource integration teachers, therapeutic writing, and behavior consultants, and our connections program. So we are, as Caroline mentioned, doing our best to reach out to all clients and connect, whether it's by phone or Zoom. And she's right, there are interventions happening. So some of our clinicians were very familiar with use of Zoom and actually using it for interventions. So for them, this was a seamless move. So a lot of our hand-in programs are continuing to run. They've been very innovative in revamping some of our small group and individual interventions. So they'll be beginning to be running in the spring. And to address the waiting lists, as you all know, there are waiting lists for pretty much every discipline. They have a plan to start doing intake and beginning assessments using telepractice for those families that want to come off the waiting list and start their assessment process. So we took a couple weeks to get everybody up and running and familiar with the technology, and we're still learning. I think we're at the point now where we're getting our feet more on the ground and actually providing services. And I meet regularly with our autism manager, and they have lots of great programs and supports running now, and working on some webinars and workshops that we'll be offering very shortly.
Thank you, Sarah. Ken, I'll end this question with you. How are you able to work with clients in your area?
Yes, hello. My name's Ken Robertson. As mentioned earlier, I'm a father of three, or parent of three ASD. I actually have four, but some of the things that I forgot to mention earlier as well is I actually put a petition together under Directions Autism, which is I'm chairman of parent-to-parent support group that helps navigate the current systems of Jordan's Principle to the OAB, to even British Columbia. But some of the things that I take very seriously is when I petitioned the government to find out how many families were leaving the reservation to go off reserve to better access, well, a lot of things, not just healthcare, but that's the main focus of a lot of families who can afford to leave the reserve. So going to talk about the northern and rural parts of here today, I wanted to jump on in regards to is some issues came up about online security, for instance, like Zoom. Some other things that they wanted to learn about is how do we reach the ones that we can't online who have internet access. Those were kind of the major concerns because we don't have the infrastructure, as James mentioned earlier, to actually properly support anybody online in these rural and remote communities. So there is a huge demographic that is in the dark, for instance, when it comes to internet access of information. The flip side of it, I was thinking, is that we have to think of in the 1920s or 1930s models when it comes to education or any ways and means of reaching out to these families who are isolated, even more so, is by correspondence trail of mail. So for instance, you know, what could we do in the meantime with these other families is mail them a curriculum book with an answer key for parent or guardian or caregiver, so that you can learn with them. But of course, I know it's a little harder with our side of the community when it comes to autism, because the needs, some are greater, some are less, but more so of greater needs. So trying to establish, you know, reading to the child, taking them out for an hour, you know, stuff like this would directly benefit the child. But again, we're dealing with situations where there's overcrowding in houses on reserves, there's limited water to wash hands safely. You know, there's so many other social issues and when it comes to dealing with just trying to practice with living day-to-day solutions. You know, food security is one of the biggest issues. But going back to education pieces, one thing I've been trying to get people with e-learning, for instance, is go onto the TDSB site. They have amazing e-learning site that has a lot of access that you can use for clients. The other flip side of it too is that it's a broad range from kindergarten all the way up to 12. So it's a range, but again, dealing with the northern rural parts, so you'd have to have a correspondence, the old moccasin trail, as I always say. I think we have a huge challenge when it comes to overhousing and water and food security. There's so many other things, and there have been some announcements regards to helping them. But again, these are systemic issues that have been going on for decades, if not 20, 30, 40 years of ongoing issues. And frankly, that's why there is Jordan's principle. Online therapy, I'll tell you from my own personal parent perspective, we are doing it here as well. Some of the things, of course, too, respite is a little more difficult, obviously, with different types of needs and services. But we're trying to manage a schedule online. So that's why I go back to what's online security, what's safe for us and our children. The other thing is too is I talked to a clinician yesterday about this, about moving forward. How would we think outside of the box of assessments now? The needs still are going to be there. People are still going to have children, and these are not going to go away anytime quickly. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Ken. You've led into the next question I have, which is really the big question here today. What are the biggest obstacles that you see for distance education? You guys have been providing services outside of education, but now that we're moving towards a distance education, e-learning, what are the big challenges? Dennis, you want to start?
Sure, thanks, Matthew. I would say from our experience in terms of distance education and e-learning, again, I'll come back to a couple of points that Ken just pointed out, was it would be, for us, it would be opportunity. And what I mean by opportunity is having that ability to be able to have the bandwidth, for example, that's available. I think curriculum is available that can be done, but it's also being able to deal with kind of the day-to-day life that families are going through in Northern Ontario. I think about you know, some of the traditional activities that they have in terms of hunting, and some families that are displaced for months on end in the spring because of floods and whatnot as well. So those are all aspects, I think, that as service providers, we need to learn, and I will speak from our experience, is that we need to learn to be flexible with those, to respect those activities and those traditions that go on within those communities, but being flexible in the sense of, do we always have to ask families to meet our needs as organizations, or should the organization really be meeting the needs of the families and providing some of those opportunities? One of the ways that we've been trying to partner with the local college is being able to figure out, is there a way that from a distance education piece that there could be a connection with getting the information from the educational institution up to families, or are there opportunities to bring families into the community to be able to support one of the members of the family, both members of the family, to gain some of that insight and that knowledge that they can actually bring back into the community as well. A lot of it is obviously cost that's associated with that, and are there ways that we can, as community providers, support some of those costs, whether it's having conversations with the Ministry of College, Universities and Training. Is there a way that it can be sponsored in one way or another, where those that are actually interested to give back to their home communities can have the opportunities to do so? So I think the e-learning component, as Ken mentioned, as from a family perspective, given the COVID-19 situation, we jumped into it with both feet, recognizing that, and we talked about this just before the call, was how that could potentially be a burden on the family as well, in terms of scheduling, trying to ensure that they have supports in place at home while they're trying to learn and whatnot as well. But the greatest component, I really do think, is establishing that trusting relationship. And how do you build that trusting relationship for families who want to be able to give back again to their community?
Caroline? Caroline? Okay, there you go.
There we go. So I think that for us, it's trying to figure out, much like others have said here, is trying to figure out how we do meet the families where they are. And I can't emphasize enough, we're all pretty gung-ho to help out. And in some ways, we're overwhelming some of the families. So we've taken a really hard step back a bit and try to organize ourselves a little bit around that, to make sure that a family is trying to meet their educational needs, they're trying to meet their basic needs of food and feeding children, and maybe their sleep patterns are all off as well because they're out of routine. They're managing behaviors. To have 2 or 3 calls a day, or to have this e-learning or Zoom coming in at them at certain scheduled times during the day, we do have to be cognizant that that's overwhelming. And so we have multidisciplinary approaches to families. So families can be involved with 3 or 4 providers, all of whom rightly want to help. But it's just one thing to keep in mind as we use this technology. It isn't without its need, as you've said. There's not a relief worker coming in and looking after all the other kids while this person's sitting down and the parent is trying to learn something new. The other thing is that we do struggle with bandwidth, and we do struggle with people not having technology, period. Even our cell phones, as we drive around the county, we drop them, and we're not even in the north, I don't think, anyway. But we have some significant issues going on, and it's how to deal with that, because it is frustrating when families have taken the time and then it's new technology, they've never used it before, and it's just another frustration. So those are some of the areas that we're trying to figure out, and just be a little more cognizant of what we're doing as we go forward. Building technology and I guess the other thing is really remembering to ask the family what they need right now, so that we're not building our goals that we had pre-COVID and just dragging them along and saying we're going to do this, because that may no longer be the issue at hand. So it's another sort of learning that we've had.
James, I'm going to ask you a question. Since you're the communication technology infrastructure person on the call right now. What do you guys see as the challenges to meet the needs of the vast geography of Ontario that is not urban and suburban, that hasn't necessarily had the need for the tech that we require today?
Well, big question, right? So I'll try to condense it, being mindful of the time and the availability that everyone has until the top of the hour. For Xplornet, these issues kind of fall into three buckets. You have quality of service, the availability of that service, making sure that people have access to it, making sure that it's high quality, and then of course the cost. Installing the internet in a community 2 hours north of Timmins is very, very, very different than installing an internet connection, at a tower in Etobicoke. These are the sorts of challenges that at Xplornet we deal with on a regular basis. You're talking about not just before you even get to the cost of the actual service and whether or not that's affordable and meets the needs of the family, you have costs that, at Xplornet we incur just to make the service available. These are equipment costs. These are travel costs of the installer to travel to the community. These are, various other ancillary costs in order to pay for mileage, gasoline, things of that nature. These costs per installation can become as high as $800-900 before you even see any sort of profitability on the service. And I'm sharing these sorts of numbers in confidence with the group, Matthew. Obviously you'll post it. These are the sorts of costs that companies inherit to deliver the internet to rural and remote communities, and that's before you even take into account the actual cost of the service or whether or not it's adequate to meet your needs. And of course, in order to increase the quality of the service, that obviously necessitates more investment into these communities and more upgrades, more installers, and just generally drives costs up, not down. That is the biggest challenge for us, is ensuring that the actual installation of the service is at a certain price, that it does not become prohibitive for Xplornet to charge the customer a reasonable price for their monthly fee to access the internet. Period. Full stop. And so, when we're having conversations with government and policymakers, and I understand that you'll take the dialogue that we have today and parcel that up into a communication to the provincial government. What we talk to provinces about all the time is setting up an environment, whether it is a rebate for the really rural, really remote parts of Canada that don't have access to an adequate internet connection. It can be income-based by leveraging existing federal and provincial data in terms of the total gross income of the home. These are the sorts of programs that drive costs down in order to actually get the internet installed, and hopefully that's what this is all about, right? Because at the end of the day, 95% of rural Canada has access to an internet connection, whether or not they choose to connect to the internet, whether or not that internet connection meets their needs, whether it's of a high quality, whether it is cost effective. That is the key question.
Thanks very much, James. At this time, I'm going to open up for questions and comments to the participants. So if anybody wishes to comment on things, ask a question, talk about some of the struggles or solutions that you guys have come up with, use the raise hand feature in the participants window. And when I see your hand raised up, I'll say your name and you can go ahead. And thank you, James, for the very detailed information, the breakdown and understanding how and why bringing the internet out remotely is so expensive. It really clarifies things, and it really clarifies that we really need to get to push the governments right now, who are the ministries who are trying to change how we do things, to be able to support those people that just can't do that. All right.
Well, what it does is it also takes away pressure on the cost of the monthly package for customers.
Yes.
Which is most important.
All right. Thank you. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question to follow up. My question, it would be for James. For the federal, as you mentioned before, you're always talking in regards to the Ontario or the feds, whichever, interchangeable or at the same time. Have you, since the new changes, for instance, They are even paying for carriers, for instance, up in the north, say like Nunavut or Northwest Territories or even Yukon. They're actually saying they're going to pay carriers to transport supplies or whatnot. Would something, for instance, setting up a team of technicians to set up not just broadband, but the start of infrastructure, for instance, to build capacity within those communities, would getting a grant, for instance, instead of just a rebate, but an actual grant to inject money into it right away to get money out the door faster, for instance, to start projects like that?
Sure. I mean, government investment always accelerates projects, right? It makes them go faster, and it makes the internet get delivered into people's homes quicker. We're in discussions. I can tell you that we're in discussions with 7 of 10 provinces currently on various, programs, most of which are COVID-19 related, in order to ensure that, again, those families in rural and remote communities who don't have access to an adequate internet connection can get it. There are all sorts of geographic challenges that I don't think I need to tell you about, Ken, in terms of setting up infrastructure programs in the short term in the far north. Typically, we've used one of our 5, they're called geostationary satellites, that are orbiting the Earth to send a signal from the satellite to one of our gateways in order to service communities, for example, in Nunavut and elsewhere. We've found that that's typically been the most cost-efficient way to serve customers in those communities. Now, the challenge that we see currently is that with satellites, there's a finite amount of capacity. This is the jargon that we use in the industry, but essentially the amount of data that people can use per month, a finite amount of capacity on these satellites. And with all of the usage occurring across our network right now, that satellite capacity is shrinking, and it's becoming occupied. And so the challenge that we have currently is the ability to add new customers on these satellites. A grant would help, Ken, but against the backdrop of this global pandemic and solutions to go really quickly, really fast, the challenge that you would have is this isn't something that you could execute in 60 to 90 days. And there would have to be a business case in place to sustain the investment going forward. Grant money can get it built, but you don't want orphaned infrastructure, 3 or 4 months after the fact, unless the government were to play a sustained role in operating the infrastructure itself.
Does anyone else have any comments? Some of the struggles that you're facing up north? Douglas, go ahead.
So first, just thank you, Matthew, for organizing this. I think it's great what you're doing. And I thought first I would just introduce myself really quickly. I work for a company out in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan called Tiny Eye Therapy Services. So maybe some of you have heard of us. And it's a company that pioneered online speech therapy and occupational therapy over 15 years ago. So we do deal with a few of the school districts in Northern Ontario as well as First Nations schools. So I just really want to irritate that yeah, we kind of seen the same challenges, right? That technology is a challenge, particularly in the homes, as I've been working with the schools to transition the students from the school environment to the home environment. So a lot of the homes, either they don't have the computer equipment in place, or the internet connection is not strong, or it's also some of the parent participation, right? It may not be strong, or you have to work with a guardian or something like that. So we had some success. The schools have been really awesome, reaching out to the different homes and the different parents to find out who has the technology, and we worked with them doing that. And we have managed, I would say, maybe to about 50% of the students we were dealing with in the school environment, we managed to provide the same services in the home environment. So we've had some success, but for sure, and I don't want to pick on James, but for sure, having that a stronger internet connection in these communities, especially for the families, is so crucial to switch to online learning.
I'll go to Dennis and then Ken.
Great, thanks, Matthew. I think I just wanted to mention, just in terms of one of the bigger struggles that we always face ourselves, and what I challenge our organization with is, one, we're going through transition times or difficult times from a financial perspective and whatnot. it always seems that it's, the easy way to kind of sort some of these issues out from a financial perspective is to really take a look at, well, how much does it cost us to deliver services? And if, you're in the far north, it costs you X amount of dollars to be able to do that. And that always seems to be the area that actually is the first area that many organizations look at. And I really, with the introduction of the Ontario Autism Program and our experience in terms of delivering autism services, we've really pushed our organization to look at things in a different way as well. That really isn't the solution, because the minute that becomes the solution, then we can continuously disenfranchise those families in northern communities to access the services that they truly deserve, the same as everybody else in the province. So I think what has been discussed today, just in terms of, how can we do this virtually, but also how can we combine the virtual with building trust with families, is a really important component that we need to continue to put on the table and not use it as a, I guess for lack of better words here, as a crutch to say from a financial perspective, this is the solution that we need.
All right, Ken, I'll go to you, and then we'll wrap things up. So we're at 11:55 right now.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick comment. James, I was talking earlier about the infrastructure and the grant, but what I was thinking is that this is a long-term game post-COVID as well, because we're trying to establish, what I would like to see is a network that's broadband together in the north, obviously, that could work and share not just data but information when it comes to the internet. But going to the other part, I do sit on the board at Autism Ontario as treasurer, and at the Autism Ontario site is a great wealth of information for people to access. And there is a system navigator in there as well. So, I mean, when it comes to those who can't access it, I mean, there comes a time of great need to be met, and people need to know information. Thanks.
So to wrap things up, I appreciate everybody who's been participating today, as well as those who are listening in or watching in. It's provoked a lot of really good ideas. We know that the struggles, to summarize, there's access to internet, but it doesn't mean people can use it in the rural and remote areas. There's many barriers there that are social as well as technological, that in times like this need to get addressed almost hand in hand or beforehand. So we need to find ways of it. Cost is probably the biggest obstacle to having technology everywhere equally. And so we need to work with government to ensure that this isn't the short-term issue. This is a medium-term issue for a lot of us. It's a long-term issue for many of us. And we need to find ways of being creative for distance education, that it can't just be virtual. Finding ways of connecting people, that personal connection that still needs to be made, and looking at ways of providing alternatives like correspondence education is something that we need to keep in mind for those that really can't connect virtually, either because of the cost of even having a computer or having internet. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but I do like the direction that things are going, and I think that we have the opportunity to use this right now, the situation, to change how we access the internet in the rural, remote, northern areas, and build communities. I like what we've talked about, what Dennis was talking a lot about. A lot of these communities need trust providers. They need to trust that the technology is going to, it's more than just the infrastructure. So again, I thank you guys for participating. With that, I'm going to be following this up with an email tomorrow. I'll be posting the video of this on my website, and there'll be a link to that in the email, and with a summary. And I'll be writing up something to send to the Ministry of Education following this. And again, I thank you for the call. And if you guys have any follow-up things, you can reach me by the email that you received the invitation to. And have a great day, guys, and keep safe.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Bye.
Thanks, Matthew.